Welcome to Roadcase, the podcast that explores the live music experience. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Josh Rosenberg, and I'll be taking you on a journey through in-depth interviews with performers and key people in the industry to explore the magic of live music, how it can be totally transformative for both fans and performers, and we'll look at how they take it all out on the road. It's going to be a great ride, so here we go. Hey everyone, welcome back to Roadcase. This is your host, Josh Rosenberg. Thanks for joining me for this special episode. We got tons of new episodes coming up in the weeks and months to come, so stay tuned for that. And I'm really excited for this one. And as you may know, I'll remind you to please get involved with the Roadcase community. I'd love to hear from you. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can shoot me an email at info@roadcasepod.com. Send me your suggestions, comments, or just say hi. Suggestions for guests would be cool. Would love to hear from you. You can also get involved and join the party over at Patreon at patreon.com/roadcasepod. We also have a YouTube channel called Roadcase Podcast, oddly enough. And of course, we haven't been banned for Twitter yet, so you can follow us on social still, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Our handle is at Roadcase Pod. And if you can, of course, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And when you're there, please rate and review this podcast. That would be a big help to us. So on this episode, I'm really excited to have the amazing Ken Stringfellow of the Posies. He's also a touring member of R.E.M. and was a touring member of Big Star, and I really love Ken. He's such a gracious human. He's an amazing punster, so we have fun with that. And he just has a very philosophical manner of looking at all things music and all things of life in general. He's very philosophical, and he's a master storyteller, and I really enjoyed this interview. Ken, as you may know, is based in Tours, France. He's been there for many, many years, and he's had some experiences recently of being able to play shows in indoor venues in Spain at a limited capacity. So we'll get an update as to the COVID situation in Europe and the shows that he played there and what those looked like. He'll tell us a lot about his initial show, Shutdown Odyssey, back in March, which is quite interesting because he was in America and needed to get back to his family in France, and that was a whole interesting ball of wax. But Ken is constantly touring, always playing solo shows in general, and is a super hard-working musician, and so fascinating that he's played in, to his estimation, over 100 countries and places as far-flung as Laos and Bhutan, and he'll tell us some amazing stories of playing there. And we'll get into his background with R.E.M. as well, how he connected with them through Peter Buck and Scott McCoy of -5, while R.E.M. came to Seattle to record Automatic for the People back in the early 90s, and just some fascinating stories about how Ken was caught up kind of in this whirlwind situation of auditioning for R.E.M. and then Neil Young shows up at the audition, and it ends up to be a rehearsal for the show the next day at the Bridge School benefit, and we'll hear some amazing stories about Ken's involvement in that, and it's like his first or third show with R.E.M. playing with Neil at Bridge School. So it was really amazing, and we'll also talk a little bit about what Ken learned from the late Alex Chilton from Big Star, and how Alex's philosophy on music and life changed the way that Ken looks at his own life and the way he kind of looked at producing music. So that's also a very enlightening and interesting perspective that we get from Ken as well. And the Posies have a new single out called Sideways, and they're working on some new material right now. And Ken's also got a streaming show that's going to happen on February 26th, and he's got a whole bunch of things that you can different levels of involvement that you can get into. You can look at that on his website, and he'll even write a song for you if you sign up for that. So I think that's a really interesting perspective on ways to tackle COVID now, and how to get involved with fans. And Ken's certainly an advocate of doing that, and he very much advocates inclusivity and his shows as a safe space, which I think really speaks to him as a magnanimous, sensitive, and interesting human. So I think you'll really enjoy this interview. Ken's, like I said, a master storyteller and a really kind of a music philosopher. So it's a really interesting interview. Thanks again for joining me. Thanks to Ken Stringfellow for spending this time with Roadcase, and here we go. Hey Ken, thanks for joining Roadcase, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for being here, man. And you said you're joining me from Tours, France.
Mm-hmm. The only place where a musician would go off the road is to Tours, of course.
Of course. Like, why didn't I think of that? And that's pun number one. So we're on a. Let me just tally. Let's ding. Yeah, we should have a little dinger. So I'll just I'll do the little tally marks here. So how long have you been in Tours, and why there?
I've been in France for 17 years. I'm married to a wonderful French lady, and we met. She worked for our record label. We met 28 years ago. And when the Posies, my band, first came to Europe, my wife Dominique was actually doing our promo in France and did a remarkable job. We were actually the first band she worked with, and she was just a natural, and that led for her to quite an illustrious career in the French music biz. And it did us plenty of favors in France in 1993. So we had love at first sight, but things weren't quite, shall we say, organized to capitalize on that first meeting. Yeah. But we never forgot each other, and actually 10 years later we'd stayed, we still saw each other when I came through town. We left the label and she left the label, and things changed in terms of our work, but we kept seeing each other when we could, and when we were both single in 2003, we wasted absolutely zero time in getting married and having our daughter.
Yeah. So you knew her for quite a while before you got married, but that's
10 years. Yeah,
it's worked. Yeah. Well, that's a good story. That's a good story. How are things going with you these days? And like, what's up in Europe? Like, give me a field report on touring, music, COVID.
Well,
all that fun stuff.
It's pretty much like anywhere else, except something really interesting happened. Now, as we're talking, I don't know when this is going to air, but like a week or so ago.
Probably pretty soon. Yeah, a week or so.
A week or so ago, like on the last week of January, I went on tour.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Where'd you go? What'd you do?
Well, Spain is right next door to France, and Spain is a place where my band has always been quite well loved, and we have a perennial audience. I mean, we can play there we could play there every year, and people would show up and be just as enthusiastic. We cannot seem to wear them out. And that applies to some degree to my solo work, and of course my association with R.E.M. R.E.M. was very popular there, and just everything that I've done has struck the right chord in Spain. And so there was this window. I'm not sure that window's still open internally, and certainly from the external point of view, no one's going in or out anymore. But for that 1 week, it was possible to do shows and come from outside of Spain to do them. And being that I'm in Europe already, so I had this unique opportunity as an American to play in Spain. So I can safely say, I'm not 100% sure, but I can't find any other evidence that I was and kind of still am, even though I'm not on tour anymore, the only internationally touring artist of any kind for that week.
Which week? What week was that?
That would be I played January 23rd, 24th, and 26th. I mean, there might be somebody else touring internationally. I can't find any evidence of any Americans touring internationally in that time.
For sure.
And
I think that's a safe assumption. Yeah.
And I think even as artists in general, I can't find any evidence of anyone touring internationally. So it was quite unique. And the window was short. They were, Spain has suffered quite a bit in COVID land. They were one of the, in that early wave, France, Italy, and Spain had an immediate peak in March, April, May, and they've been rather beaten down by it. And I think that Spain took the chance of saying, okay, we need to give people something. They've been culturally deprived for a long time, and they felt that like having some cultural events would be safe under the right conditions. And I think, I mean, safe is it's a very incomplete word, because nothing in COVID is 100% safe, nor is anything 100% dangerous. There's just a ways of weighing that risk and seeing what's possible. I've done a few shows since the COVID, from March, when COVID really shut things down, when conditions were right. I did a show in Germany in September, a couple other things like that. I've traveled a little bit. Of course, it's risky. Of course, that it could have gone wrong, but I also feel like if you take all the precautions, then the risk is much, much lower. I mean, I think we have to look at it in a way, how we dealt with, the onset of the AIDS crisis. I mean, suddenly you had to think about certain things that you didn't before in the same way. And no interaction in terms of like sexual interaction is risk-free, but with certain precautions, you mitigate the risk quite a bit. And I don't want to, I mean, I'm only just using that as a very, very broad analogy, but that's just
we are not medical professionals, so
right.
we'll leave it at that. But no, for sure, there's a level of mitigation that you can undertake to make it safer.
And in Seattle, where I come from, they have opened the door to live music just recently. The numbers in the Seattle area are quite good, and so they've moved into phase 2, which in Washington State now there's just 2 phases. There's 1, there's 2, and then you're out of the woods after that. And in phase 2, the live music is permitted with a whole bunch of restrictions and regulations, etc. But it sounds like things will be happening, very small things, but they are already allowed. I just think very few people are. I think people are quite shell shocked and really want to make sure they're doing it right before they take those risks.
Yeah, I hope that we need to kind of roll that out safely and slowly, I think. But when you were in Spain, what were you in Madrid?
I played Castellón, which is kind of near Valencia. I played Barcelona and Madrid.
Yeah. So what were the parameters of the show from a safety standpoint? How did that go down, and how was it different?
Well, much reduced capacity. So it depended on the size of the venue and how much space you could put between people. But generally, we're talking about 50, 60 people a show.
In a venue of what size?
The venue I played in Barcelona holds 400 normally, maybe even a little bit more. And it was capacity 70 for that show.
Okay. So 25% capacity, roughly.
Something like this.
No. My math sucks. Less than that.
Less than that, yeah. But then, having said that, the venue in Castellón, officially, they could have put more people in. It's a smaller town, but it's a very big space. It really has to do with the shape of the space too. How far apart can you put the people in the chairs? So in the venue in Barcelona, for example, has different gradations on the floor. So it was quite a challenge to get seats kind of you couldn't just put them anywhere because there's like a couple barricades and things like this. Whereas the venue in
Right.
Castellón is an old motor garage, so you could just put the chairs in a grid and then block off what you want, depending on how people bought the tickets, if they bought them in together or separately, for example.
Right.
But other than that, of course, masks, and of course, the venue in Madrid was able to serve. And so that was kind of interesting. The venue in Barcelona was not, but they decided to have a show anyway. They served, but they had the bar was separate from the showroom, and the bar was only open for like an hour before the show, and then as soon as the show started, it was closed. Once you were seated for the show, you couldn't move. And then Castellón, there was no alcohol served. That was more of a cultural space.
I get it, right. Yeah, it kind of defeats the purpose if you're like drinking and taking off your mask, but like
Right.
venues got to be venues got to be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much they charge for a drink in Spain, but I assume it's kind of like the same game plan that it is here, right?
Well, it's not.
They're making money off of drinks.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not. They're not extremely expensive, but that is their only avenue. I mean, in some cases, like the venues also, of course, take some of the door, but not really in the case of these shows. But I mean, I think just everybody wanted to make something happen, and they just, and me too. I mean, of course, I love going to Spain, and I love traveling, and those are things that I really miss. I've been able to do a little bit, but normally, I mean, if you follow my trajectory, I'm like all over the place all the time, doing so many things in so many countries.
Putting you on lockdown is like crazy, man.
And yet I loved it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's providing everyone with an opportunity to kind of downshift. I loved it for the first 3 or 4 months, even like 9 months, I think. Maybe just the turn of the new year sort of like, made everyone think, or at least myself, just, I was like, oh, Jesus, if we're another year now, it's almost a year. But yeah, how has it been a positive for you? Well, let me ask one question first. That's with the Disciplines.
When the tour I just did?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no.
Which band is that?
That was just solo. I mean, the Disciplines.
Oh, okay.
Hasn't really been around for like a decade, but I have a.
Whoops.
I have a.
It's hard to keep track.
No, I understand. I do a lot of things.
There's so much stuff,
man. I play as a solo artist quite a bit. I have 4 solo albums that have come out over the last 20
they're
years.
great. Yeah.
And the solo thing has its own following, and what's also very nice about it is it's very easy to work with. It's very easy to produce and this kind of thing. So I could fit into that little window that Spain offered, whereas if I'd had to organize that with a band, that wouldn't have been possible.
Yeah. Well, so along those lines, how did that go down? I'm just so curious. Like, how did you find out that there was going to be a window? And then, obviously, since you just mentioned like it was solo, so you were like, hey, let's pack the suitcase, let's go. Right. But how did that go down? Like, how did you find out about it? And then how far in advance was that? It was,
Well, basically, I did a tour in Spain last year in January before everything changed. A few dates in January and February, actually. And it was, very successful, and everybody had a great time. And the place in Castellón called La Bohemia, they really were keen to do something else. They said, this is great, come and do it again. And I was like, well, okay, sure. I mean, that's vague enough to say yes to.
Sure.
But as we actually kind of talked about a date last summer when things were totally shut down. I think that was just a way of having a little ray of hope there. We talked about doing a date in January, assuming we were well, we're going to be out of the woods by then.
Right, yeah, of course.
So as January started to roll around, actually the guy from the venue said, look, we have this situation here where we can actually still do these shows. I cannot guarantee you it'll stay like that, but we were talking in October basically, and he's like, it's still possible. They're talking, and then, so kind of like November-ish, I was like, well, let's try it and see what happens. And so I reached out to a couple other venues that I know the promoters directly, etc., and just said, "Hey, are you guys able to do stuff?" Blah blah blah. And in some cases yes, some cases no. And the ones that said yes were happy to go for it. They were thrilled to have an international artist come and play, even a crappy one. So we just kind of made it happen. And it, I'm kind of used to putting my tours together pretty directly. With the Posies, we have a booking agent. We work in the so-called traditional manner. But for my solo stuff, I pretty much can make that happen, myself, and take care of all those details. And so I did my own ticketing for some of it, and then some of it was through the venue, and pretty much like normal shows, and it all worked.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say that
Right.
that Castellón is in the region of Valencia, which had been having a kind of late spike. There had been a lot of stuff going on in that area, and some of the towns very close to Castellón were in January having like serious spikes again, which made people a little gun shy. So 50 people is much less than I would have there normally. We could have had more, but I just think people were just not. A lot of people were too gun shy. And the news is, I was sitting there having lunch at my host's house while I was there, and he had the TV on during lunch, and it's just nonstop, just like terrifying news about COVID, basically. Which I get
welcome
it.
to the party, man. It's happening here too.
It's a serious issue. We can't. We can't ignore it. But it is. I don't really watch television. I know I'm saying that like one of those people that doesn't watch television. I actually just don't have time, as I'm working in the studio all the time, so I don't really get around to it. But I realize that you have a different point of view about certain things, and it weighs upon me a little bit less. I'm absolutely aware that COVID is a serious issue. I do read the newspaper online every morning. I'm not ignorant or saying, "Oh, it's going to go away. It's magic," whatever Trump said. Or,
it's going to wash right through.
I'm not in that mindset at all.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's a hoax or anything like that. I know people who've been sick. I know people who have had relatives that have died and things like this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you don't soak in that 24/7, you can step back a little bit and maybe see, well, okay, I mean, it's less terrifying to me. Not because it's not serious, but just because I don't think terror is helpful.
Yeah, you have a point there. I mean, you've got stuff that you need to get done. You're not doom scrolling.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some positives in not getting involved in every little bit of detail about the direction of the virus or the direction of vaccines. Checking in on the details every week or every 10 days is one thing. Being on it every single day can get exhausting, right? And can
because it's futile.
take away
as well.
from what you're doing.
I mean, you can't.
Right.
You're not in control. So I mean, just being like inundated with all those facts that you can't really do much about isn't really.
For sure.
That's not a good feeling either.
Right. To go back to the positives, I mean, you mentioned, the COVID period, and that you sort of alluded to the fact that, it can be a positive. It can be kind of a downshift. How has that sort of panned out in your own life there?
How did that pandemic out?
No, yeah. Whoa, ding, ding, ding. We got another one.
2 for 2.
That's number 2. There you go.
First of all, I made it home, which was a miracle. It's a story I've told a few times, but in a nutshell, I was on tour, in March. I was in the States,
right.
And so basically, I had a whole bunch of plans for 2020, like many people. And one of those plans that was kind of in the works was doing a show in Algeria. And in Algeria, you need 6 months validity remaining on your passport when you arrive. A lot of countries have that rule.
Yeah, that's kind of like almost the general rule of thumb everywhere.
So my passport was expiring at the end of the year, at the end of 2020. And so when I was in the States in February, I said, well, you know what, I might as well just, while I'm here, I don't need it for a month, so I'll renew it. And I use a company in LA, so it's a little bit better than just throwing it into the post office, and going, okay, well, maybe I'll see you in a month. But I use a visa services company in LA for touring musicians. So I sent the passport off, and at the end of February, I put a, not really a rush on it, but you could do it faster than normal if you like. Kind of thing. It's kind of a Minnesota version of the rush.
Yeah, right. I mean, don't rush too much, but if you can, if it's, it's not too much trouble. I'd like to get it sooner than later.
Kind of the Canadian rush there. Not the band, of course.
No, whoa, hold on. Yeah, that's another subject. And if you want to go there, I can go deep with you on that one, too.
No problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I had this, the passport was out and about doing its thing, getting renewed, and I was doing the tour, and I had to just keep going. And then somewhere during that tour things started to really change. I noticed it really like around March 11. Basically, it was the first show that people who bought tickets messaged me and said, "Hey, I have tickets to your show tonight, but to be honest, I'm not really sure I want to go out." Or I bought tickets to your show tonight, but I've been feeling like I have a cold. I'm not sure if it's the thing or just a cold. So, principal precaution, I'm gonna stay home and have a great show. So that was the first day I noticed that. And then South by Southwest canceled right about then, but I was just I've got no passport. There's no point to me stopping right now until I'm forced to stop. And so it goes like this. Basically, on the 15th of March, the Sunday, I played my last show. I still had one more show on the tour, but what would be my last show in Houston. I got an email on Sunday from the visa services company in LA saying, "Hey, your passport's going to be in on Monday. What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'll just give you guys a call. I'm thinking about maybe going to Austin because my flight home, which would have been after South by, is from Austin. I'm going to try and rejig it from there and see what happens." So I'll call you tomorrow. Okay. Monday morning, the 16th of March, I wake up in my hotel in Houston at 7 in the morning, bolt upright, just there's a voice in my head saying, "Go now, go." And I'm like, I don't know whose voice it was, I don't know what it was, but the message was clear. It's time to go. So I got out of bed, opened my laptop. I wrote to the visa people and said, "Hey, actually, you know what? I'm going to come to LA and pick that passport up. Hang on to it. And if you guys have to close your office, courier it to my assistant in Burbank. Here's her info, blah, blah, blah." So then I went over I had some United miles. I'm a Delta flyer generally, but I know Houston's a United city. So I said, well, I've got to have some United miles, I had enough for one flight. There was a flight leaving for LA in 90 minutes. I booked it. It was $5 after I turned my miles in. I drove 1,000 miles an hour to Houston Intercontinental, dropped my rental car, flew to LA on a basically empty flight. By that time, the passport had already been delivered to my assistant, Tina, who, God bless her, she drove all the way from Burbank to LA to bring me that freaking thing. So she is a true friend. And I basically bought a flight, the last flight, to Paris, right then and there in the airport, as the president was saying, "Hey, I'm closing the borders tomorrow at noon. Nobody in or out."
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
So I had a little bit of pressure. Yeah,
right. So you're there at the counter, like just saying, "Okay, I need a one-way ticket to Paris."
Yeah. Well, basically I was like completely panicking, and I looked like someone who should not be allowed in a plane. I was like, drenched in sweat and shaking and incoherent. And the woman at the Air France counter at Tom Bradley Terminal was very cool. She's like, "Everything's cool. You're going to make the flight. Stand right here. Open your phone. Open the app. Book it on the app. You'll save at least a couple $100. I'll wait for you. Just do the thing." everything's cool. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna make that.
Right,
And so I'm like, go. So I booked the flight. It was not cheap. I'm just gonna say that. There were no seats left in coach. So I booked the next class up, which is premium economy, which, day of the flight is, it was expensive, but the tour had made money. The tour had done well. So everything was cool. And then I went to check in just at the other desk right across the hall there. And the guy is like, okay, but, as a non-French citizen, non-French resident, you have to show me that you're leaving France. And I'm like, dude, nobody's going anywhere for like forever. Like, this is the end of civilization. Like, what do you care?
Right.
And he's like,
he wanted proof that you were coming back.
Yeah.
In other words, like you couldn't buy a one-way ticket is what he was trying to assert.
He's trying to assert. Yeah. And I'm like, okay. And I said, look, I have a flight to Beirut in like 10 days. I mean, it's not going to happen, but I have it. Will that work for you? And he's like, yeah,
that'll work.
That's fine. Show it to me. I'm like, okay. So I show him my flight to Beirut, and he's like, okay, that's fine. And then, I got on the plane a couple hours later, which was weird because the coach was full. It was the last flight. It was rammed.
Right.
And the premium economy was empty. There were 4 people in it. So I had like all this space, which was great because I was a little freaked out. I'm not going to lie. Because I didn't know. What the hell? So then I landed at 11, and the borders closed at noon. Trains weren't running anymore, so my wife sent like a car and driver to pick me up. It's about 2.5 hour drive to where I live from the airport.
Yeah.
Normally I take the train, but there were no trains. So I made it.
A harrowing story. Did you go to Beirut? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
That was interesting though. You were eventually going back and going to do something in Beirut?
I would have normally played in Beirut, the first week of April or whatever.
Interesting.
Had a show there. Had some shows in Germany, and then I was going straight to Lebanon from there. But
so you made it home, which was great, and have you been there ever since?
No, but I was there for 6 months. I didn't fly for 6 months. I was basically when I got home in March. Lockdown severe was until May. You can't go anywhere without a permission slip.
Right.
Nothing is open. That whole thing of like people in the States saying, "Well, God, restaurants are only takeaway." I was like, "Oh yeah, I feel for you." Like you can't go anywhere without a permission slip in France. It was full
right.
on.
You needed a hall pass.
Yeah.
That was around the time when like they were utterly locking down Italy, which was crazy. I lived in Italy for several years, so I was following that pretty closely.
Yeah. So I didn't go anywhere from until May. So we have our house, and our house has a lovely yard, and it's next to some beautiful forest and this kind of thing. So we were fine. The one thing I did do was after kind of like decompressing for like a few days, like what the hell just happened to the earth and everyone and what's going on?
Yeah.
Just getting my head around it because I was just in go mode, and then I was in flight mode,
stop mode,
and then I was like in what happened mode. After I came out of that after a few days, I just put a post on Facebook and said, "Hey, I'm sitting here for the next few months. I'm ready to do studio work. Let's get to work." And it kind of coincided with people. I think people wanted to do something with their emotions, their anxieties, and their sudden free time a little bit. And so I got enough work to power me all the way through summer. I worked. I decided that I would stretch it out because as a good freelancer, I'm sure that every job is my last, right? This is how freelancers think.
Yeah. The mindset.
You've worked 75 18-hour days in a row, and you have one day off, and you're like, well, that's it. My career's over. That's the end.
Pessimistic much, Ken?
But I thought, well, I don't know how long we're gonna be stuck here, and I'm blah blah blah. I'm gonna make this work. So I worked 5 days a week for the first time in my life, as opposed to 7. And on the weekends, I taught lessons, which I'd never done before either. But I was just kind of trying to make it, stretch it out, and that worked out quite
Yeah.
well. I watched winter become spring, become summer, and that was just absolutely beautiful. I watched, my wife
Yeah.
had a birthday, my daughter had a birthday. It was all very strange, but we were together, and it was really great.
That's amazing. So you're like type A plus work personality. Your downshifting went from working 7 days a week to, oh shit, I'm only going to work 5 now.
Mm-hmm. That was my wow, I'm going to chill out.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, God, looking at your entire oeuvre of oeuvre, if you will, because, oeuvre, because we are, we're Francophiles. It's just such a plethora of bands. It's amazing. Obviously, you are an incredible workhorse, and you obviously do what you love, and you've been involved in so many different projects. You're never quite stopping, right? So
It's
how
hard.
did that work for you? Like doing like the 5 days a week, you were immediately. So what were you doing? You said you were doing some studio work. What else were you doing? Did you do any online shows and get into that kind of world?
It took me a while. Actually, the internet that we have here at this house is not incredibly robust. It's not very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was looking at, a couple different platforms, and they just really weren't working. It was not. I think our internet was just not fast enough to deal with, for those platforms to deal with. And so I didn't do any online shows for those first few months. But then I was approached by some people in Seattle called Connect Club, which starts with a K. And they have a little bit of an onboarding kind of thing that they do. So they were able to walk me through it, and their platform works really, really well. Again, I tried some of the others, just beta tested them a little bit, and it was not happening. I'm not going to mention any names. I'm just going to say that Connect Club really worked.
Yeah, we'll talk about we'll mention the good one.
Yeah.
But what was the if you were limited by broadband, then if your own broadband there was limited, then how did they get around that?
Well, their thing is fast for starters. And it's just it's just well buffered. I think that it has something to do with that. I'm not technical enough to tell you why it didn't work, but I think for one thing, some of those smaller platforms that already existed pre-COVID, some of those things I think were simply themselves kind of overwhelmed in a sense. They weren't ready for the demand, and their servers were redlined at all times. Right. I don't know if that can really happen, but that's the impression I had. And Connect Club they existed as an online events, and basically an events, like a social network for Seattle events, including music. But when they saw the writing on the wall, they quickly pivoted and recalibrated, and they kind of built. They had an opportunity that the thing was open enough that they could redesign it on the spot, and I think it just benefited from not being so entrenched from a software point of view, a server point of view, that they could design it kind of right then and there to fit the current needs. So that's my impression. In any case, it worked. And I did an online show in July, and people by that time were waiting and waiting because a lot of other artists were doing stuff on Facebook Live or whatever, and I was just out of the picture. So people were asking and asking. And so that first show was incredibly successful. I mean, it was kind of like, whoa, I could do this forever.
And that was a live stream. So you actually played live?
Yes, it was completely live. And there's some interactive stuff in Connect Club. At least people can post chat basically that everyone sees, and I see it as well. I saw that
you had a listing of things like sort of like ticketing levels where you could also kind of like a VIP where you could ask you to play a particular song and dedicate it to an individual. Is that the one I'm thinking of?
Yeah, I have different. This is something I've adapted from
really cool.
from my 3D touring life. I make that work with smaller venues and things like that by having different levels of say VIP ticketing, that some of which are really premium, and so you get some more money in, and that kind of makes everything work on the smaller venue. And I just applied that same philosophy to the online show. So yeah, I had the normal ticket, I had an early bird ticket, and then a normal ticket, and then request ticket, and then I read an actual dedication message on air thing. And actually,
I like that one. That was cool.
I have a kind of a crazy one because I have an online show coming up this month, and I've added a crazy. The ticket is for it's like quite expensive, but basically, I will write you a song and play and premiere it in the show. I will write you a song.
Whoa!
And
holy
that's,
fuck!
I'm not doing a ton of those. I just have a couple of those in there because I can't write like 20 songs, but I will do.
Yeah. Come on. Yes, you can. No,
and so I put that in.
That's amazing. When's the show?
That show is February 26th. It's 7 p.m. Seattle time. So the shows are live and they're about 2 hours. But also, for anybody who can't tune in live, they also stream for 24 hours.
Gotcha. Have you had any takers on that one yet?
Yeah. I've got a taker. So I've got a song to compose. So I'll go, I'll reach out to them and say, like, what kind of song do you want to be? Slow, fast? Do you want to be happy, sad? Do you want it to be about you? Do you want to be about something else? Or do you just want me to surprise you and this kind of thing? So, I'll let them have as much input as they want. And then I'll fill in whatever they need me to fill in. So I love stuff like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, wow. Oh yeah, I'm just thinking about all the kind of possibilities for that, and that's such a great idea. I've never heard of something like that. What a great way to kind of take advantage and look at like, what can I do that I wouldn't ordinarily do, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
I'm assuming you've never done.
Let's see what possibilities there are.
Yeah. You like to do these kind of things. You're just like very creative in how you present. What I loved, and for the Solid States album, when you did, you played in sort of, I heard unconventional venues, but didn't announce where they were going to be in a particular, the exact location until the day before. Do I have that right? And can you explain it?
Yeah. So basically, what kind of happened is I'd done a tour where I with another artist who she was at the level where she probably couldn't really get booked in clubs. She was like just a beginner, but we did this record together. And she'd kind of done all this work to figure out how to do that. Like, okay, clubs aren't going to book me. Where can I play and how can I go on tour? It's kind of taking the living room tour idea and really getting very imaginative with it. And we had a great tour, and I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. Then with the Posies record, we were making that record, and for reasons I shall not cast public blame on my bandmate on anybody for the record was like we were like gonna bunk the release date basically, and there was no time there's no reliable time that our agent could work with to book a tour, and we were kind of screwed. We had the Europe tour. We could still make the Europe tour, but in North America we kind of we were too far out. We were too close to the release at this point, and nothing was ready and blah blah blah. So I said, you know what, guys? I've got this idea. Let's do non-venues because they're not going to be booked 6 months in advance like clubs are. And our agent was like, if you guys want to do that, just do it. I don't really even know what that means. And so enter Tina, the aforementioned wonderful assistant Tina, and she and I basically
the Burbank girl,
banged it out. We found all these cool places to play. The reason that the shows were often secret is because they're kind of quasi-legal. When you think about it, we're having a show in somebody's house or in somebody's after-hours retail or something like that. So we kind of had to put some precautions on there to keep uninvited people from showing up, to keep and just kind of keep it on the down low. But they were great, and it was a really successful tour. The kind of venues ranged from, over the course of that tour, we did about 100 shows. Maybe
Wow.
maybe one or yeah, we did 100. Did we do 100 shows in all together or just in the States? We did a lot. We were like, suffice to say. Anyway, but like only in North America, only a couple of those shows were in clubs. In Seattle, we kind of were obliged to do eventually like a theater show because that we can't fit everybody in someone's house who wants to see us in Seattle.
Yeah. Well, here I am was thinking that you wanted to do something completely like deliberately off the program, kind of off the beaten path, kind of, outside the box sort of tours. And then you're telling me that it was because you couldn't book into particular venues on this. It sort of like happened by accident, but my interpretation was that, God, this is a great fucking idea.
Well, it turned out, necessity is the mother of invention, of course. I had designs on doing a tour like that on my own. I thought, well, this is great for solo stuff, but I didn't really, I mean, I thought like, well, the band would be cool, but man, it just seems like it'd be pretty hard to get a band into all these places. But then we had no choice. So I was like, okay, well, I kind of wanted to do this anyway, so let's try it. I mean, like we played, in a guy's apartment in New York. I mean, it was a very special apartment. It was not your average tiny studio apartment. It was a big, big place. But I mean, there's neighbors above and neighbors below.
You need a little buy-in.
All these kind of cool adventures out of this. We played, in a cave in South Dakota. We played. In a brewery, but not a brewery that has like a showroom. We just played like in the brewery somewhere, which was probably very dangerous. But just stuff like that. And what's cool is I have to say that now I'm 52 years old, almost 53, and this was 5 years ago. So I mean, still like late 40s. A lot of our fans, are somewhere around that 40 mark. So the fact is that some of our friends and fans are no longer like interns or, like in their first job. Some of our fans and friends, are corporate VPs or very successful lawyers or whatever. I mean, so we have some options in terms of like places that they have access to that we wouldn't have as 20 somethings because I mean, they're just nobody's at that level yet. So that helps.
I thought you were going to talk about pricing and ticketing and that kind of stuff, but I mean, from that angle also, you can kind of get turned on to opportunities where there might not have been some before that. But where did you kind of get turned on to that notion of wanting to play in different places? Was it your own personal evolution? Was it because you had played with so many different bands and you wanted to have different new experiences? Kind of where was that? How did that seed start?
Well, there's a couple places where that thought took germination. First of all, like for me, even parallel to being interested in music, music was a window into a wider world of thoughts, ideas, and feelings that weren't being represented in my immediate surroundings in suburban, boring Midwestern America as a child. Travel the same, like just looking at, I looked and read history and geography and maps and the atlas and the almanac and everything like that as a kid. And I just said, like, there's so much more to the world than, suburban Chicago. I mean, there's so much more. Not that suburban Chicago doesn't have its own valid thing, but I'm just saying there's more to life. And so travel was on my agenda, as soon as it was possible, and music kind of, provided a springboard for us to start seeing the world. I took that a step further at a certain point in my life, saying, well, we get invited to play places where our records have sold. Okay, cool. We've been to Spain and we've been to Sweden and we've been to Japan and Australia, and that's amazing, incredible. But I don't have to wait for that. I don't have to wait for the economics to make sense. If I want to go somewhere, I can just go somewhere and play a show. Why not? So I started doing that, and now I've played like almost 100 countries around the world.
Wow.
Which if I was just waiting for us to sell enough records to make a promoter, put that together, like it would never happen. So in some cases, I just go someplace. It's not that expensive to go somewhere if you're one person. and we can set up a show and make something really magical happen that is much different than just going somewhere as a tourist and wandering around and not really, getting the context on the place that, music, you make like good instant connections because you have that common ground already, which kind of takes care of a lot of the introductory things between people. So, people are already interested in what you're doing, and meet musicians can talk. I mean, whatever genre or whatever language or culture we're in, musicians, we can find a common ground. So that builds that bridge. And so, you're coming to play the show, and it's not like when I do those shows in a country that isn't on my normal touring circuit. I mean, generally, the show is free, and it's just about playing music, nothing more, nothing less. So I'm not, the people organizing the show they don't have some economic burden where I'm like, well, I need $1,000 every time I play. I'm sorry, dude. That's just not, that's not what it's about. It's about playing music and exchanging ideas and exchanging, just learning about each other, me, them, and they, me. This is already kind of a thing. And to do those shows, and sometimes you're going, I've been to places where nobody's ever played. Basically,
like give me an example.
Well, as far as like a rock musician, I'm definitely the first rock musician to play in Laos. The only artist that had played in Laos, other than like Thai pop musicians, is Dengue Fever, and I guess they're kind of rock. But they're singing in a language that people can kind of understand to some degree. So, but as far as like a fully indie rock American dude, that music was outlawed in Laos until quite a little bit before my show, so it was not possible. Bhutan, I was definitely the first American to play in Bhutan, but only a Dutch rock band had been there before, and then some bands from India, but this kind of thing. So, just kind of seeing, almost anything is possible. So it's just a matter of, are you willing to go through the hassle of making it happen? And the answer for me is, yeah, sure.
Wow. How did you pull that off? And what city in Laos was it?
In Vientiane, the capital.
Vientiane, yeah. I've been to Laos. But I was not in Vientiane. I was in Luang Prabang.
Wow. Oh yeah. Well, I only went to the capital city. I did a whole tour of the region, so I only had time to be in the capital and a little bit around. I was invited by a family to go stay with them for a day, kind of in the region, out in the countryside a little bit. But that's as far as I saw. I had 2 or 3 days in the city.
Yeah. So what was the playing experience like, and how did that come about?
Well, it was super weird. It was so funny. Again, like Vietnam, they had, after the conflicts of the 1960s and 70s, basically banned, American culture in a sense. Certainly rock music was considered decadent and not appropriate. Those things started to open up. And this was like 2010 when I went there, I believe.
Yeah.
I think I went 2010, 2011. I did Vietnam 1 year and Laos another, but that's neither here nor there.
Right.
Anyway, so but I'd done a show in Vietnam, or done a couple shows in Vietnam, and actually those guys who organized my show said, we have some friends in Laos. If you're interested in doing more shows like this next year, just drop us a line. And we have friends around the region, so hit us up. The people in Laos were an assortment of British and American guys who actually, they were all musicians, but they worked for various NGOs. And they said, well, yeah, if you want to play a show, sure. It's just that there are no clubs. So what happens in Laos, or at least what was happening at this time, 10 years ago, is, and this is, maybe but this is for the benefit of your listeners at the very least, is that they have cover bands that essentially play Thai pop music. Thailand is a bigger country with more people and a bigger entertainment industry, and the language in Laos and Thailand are similar enough that they can be quite interchangeable in terms of like songs and stuff that everybody knows. So so they have cover bands playing in certain places. Okay, so what happens is you go out on your date to go to the cover band place. The cover band is there to basically keep any awkward silence from entering the situation. It's a kind of just to, like you don't want to be sitting there and there's no sound. You're sitting there looking at your date who you don't really know yet, and the conversation goes dead. Blah blah blah. So with the band, there's always something happening. So you order like usually a bottle of hard liquor. That's kind of a prestige thing to do, is order like a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue or something like this, and you sit at the table and you drink your drinks, and then the band never stops. When I say they never stop, I mean they never stop. They tag in and out like wrestlers for the entire evening. Like 8 hours, there will be a band on stage that generally tags out singers. I mean, the rhythm section might not ever get up and leave. They might just be there all night. So I played in this place. So this was a very special occasion, that's so special that really nobody knew what to make of it. Nobody in that place had ever seen a show that wasn't this cover band thing that's just very safe and very, chill and whatnot. Right. And I, do my thing where like I'm a solo artist, but I do a lot of crazy things, and I don't use the microphone all the time, and I sing really passionately and loud, and it's kind of emo in a sense, but the musical vocabulary is just straight up indie rock. I mean, it's something that anybody who likes Elliott Smith or something like that would like, except that Elliott Smith was very soft and gentle, and I sing very hard. A bit like Shannon Wright, if you've ever seen what she does. I would consider her a kindred spirit in terms of vocal approach. So I get off the stage and do things like that too. Well, all of those rule-breaking ideas were incredibly radical to the people at this event. They knew some guy from America who'd played with some famous bands was going to be there, but once it started happening, they really just didn't know what to make of it. And actually, like, a lot of the audience looked, frankly, kind of terrified. I mean, just like, this is this is not the program. This is what the hell is going on. And I was...
They're completely stunned. Hopefully they warned them ahead of time do not bring your first date on this night.
I don't think that was... I think there were some first dates happening there, and they were kind of like... They weren't even disappointed. They were just like stunned. It'd be like if I just got up in the middle, like you're at the cinema, and if I got up in the middle of the movie and I just stood up in a chair and started like, people wouldn't quite know what to make of it. Is this guy okay? Right. So I was like, off the stage playing at one point. This is like, round tables, white tablecloths, very classy kind of looking place, and a very high stage. So I kind of jumped off of there, and I was playing down in front, and people started coming up and like taking selfies with me as if I was like some kind of animatronic kind of thing, like I wasn't even. I was in the middle of songs. And people would be like coming up and like taking like selfies with me.
You just became a novelty act.
Yeah, it was. I mean, really novel.
Wow, that's amazing.
Eventually, people were like realized it's okay, and that they weren't going to get arrested for listening to this, and everything was fine. They definitely came. They appreciated it, and they warmed up to it and loved it.
That's great. That's amazing. How did you get involved in Bhutan?
The same group, the same people. They had a friend who worked for an NGO, this Australian woman, and she happened to be pals with this guy who had just opened the first music venue of any kind in the country, which was in the basement of the nation's first shopping mall. Wow! So the shopping mall. Don't think like a big galleria in Glendale. Think more like a medical office building of like 3 stories that you like. So it's a brand new building, and pretty small. But there's like three or four floors in there with more kind of like a cross between market stalls and shops inside. That was the extent of Bhutan's first mall. And down in the basement, there's a bar. And in this bar, they listened to rock music, and there was a cover band that was playing. I mean, this thing was like, it had been open for like a month when I arrived. So that was what was really fortuitous, because we were kind of trying to put it together, and we had different ideas. And then this venue just opened while we were in this discussion. And she's like, oh, well, actually, my friend just opened a venue, so this solves everything. Oh, okay. And same kind of thing. I mean, like, they're just, nobody had ever come and played there before. I'd mentioned this Dutch band called Bluff. They're like a very, very popular band in Holland. Maybe the most popular band in Holland. I don't even know who to compare them to in America. They sing in Dutch, so their appeal worldwide is kind of limited to places that can understand Dutch. But they are so big, they decided to do like a big project, and they did like a recording session and a free gig outside in like 4 countries around the world, and one of them was Bhutan. So they'd beat me to it, but I did an actual show in a venue, which is a little different, and it was great. So I played solo for, it was probably a 4-hour gig, because I played solo for like 2 hours. Again, with people just kind of like, because there's no context to my music. It's not like I'm playing all these hits that everybody knows of mine. I'm just playing stuff from my albums and from my bands that people don't really know in Bhutan. So they just are kind of like, but the delivery is quite sincere and quite intense. So you kind of get into it. And so I just let them have it, from an emotional point of view. And so that was really cool. And then I did my thing, and then the cover band played, and I said, well, God, do you guys have, they had their big book, and I said, do you have any Neil Young in that book? And they're like, yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. And they did. So we did like, an hour of Neil Young songs plus like Smoke on the Water and whatever. I just like, whatever you guys play, I'll play it. I can play anything. I don't care. Whatever you guys can play. I can play everything but Roundabout. So we did that, and then when that was done, they played for like, so now we're in like the 3 or 4 hour mark, and then I was like, everybody wanted me to play more, so I played another hour after that by myself. It was like 4 or 5 hours. Wow. The gig only ended because the police broke it up. The police came, and they're like, we don't even know what this is. It just can't possibly be right. We don't have
this. Cannot.
We don't have a category.
This cannot
for this.
Be good.
So now you just have to go home. Sorry, everybody has to go home. It's no big deal, but you have to go home. We're gonna say it's the end, and that was that.
Right.
So that was pretty cool.
That's crazy, man. Wow. But to kick it back like many years, I wanted to talk to you about a little bit of your involvement with R.E.M, which I found super interesting. How did that come about? That was from your association with Peter Buck, and kind of what was that like being on stage with them and just taking up with what was a hugely successful band and going on the road with them?
That's a lot of different things. So let's, I'll try and put that in as organized context as possible. So first of all, I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and Seattle. I went to high school in a town called Bellingham, Washington, and that's where I met my future bandmate in the Posies, and where we started playing music together. And Seattle was just the most. That's just where you go when you live in Bellingham. It's the big city. So I went. We found our way to Seattle, which in 1988 was not on anyone's music radar whatsoever. It was not. They had none of the associations you have with Seattle right now, where you're thinking, oh, Amazon, oh, Starbucks, oh, grunge.
Right.
None of that existed. So it's just a little weird city somewhere up in the corner of America that nobody cared about. And then everything changed. But my band had this really fluky success. We made this homemade recording and put it out on a homemade cassette, and it got picked up by like major radio stations in Seattle and got played all over the place. At the same time, one of our musical heroes in Seattle at the time was and is Scott McCoy of the Young Fresh Fellows, etc. So we loved that band. They were a great local band that we loved, and they'd toured around. They toured with the Replacements. They were great. And Scott was we looked up to him. He was like a cool, nice person. He worked in the groovy record store. He wrote for the monthly music magazine, the free music magazine that came out, and he played in bands. So he had a lot of stuff going on. He was very admirable, and he was a nice person. I have to keep saying that because it's true. And not everybody in his position always turns out to be that cool.
Right.
So anyway, we gave him a copy of this homemade cassette, and he wrote our first review and gave us our first gig. So not only was he already our hero, but he really kind of made things happen. The radio thing, plus his review, plus the gig, and then he was connected to the label that eventually picked up that cassette and released it. So all of that, like Scott McCoy is the axle on which my whole career has turned in a certain sense. Without Scott, no, I wouldn't have the same. We wouldn't be talking right now. I really don't think. So anyway, when I had the opportunity to play music with Scott, I absolutely jumped on that because he asked me to produce or co-create his next solo album. He had a solo album that he released in 1990, which I loved, and I was like, "You should make another one of those." And he said, "Yeah, sure." Yeah. Okay, this is all leading to answer your question. It's just. This is an important context. So we started working on this record that was going to be a solo record, just him and I, acoustic, stripped down, blah, blah, blah. And it turned into the exact opposite of that. It turned into this musical free-for-all with all these different people and turned into a much bigger, more interesting project. And he called it the -5 instead of a solo album. He just made up a band name. Okay, so meanwhile, that's track one with Scott. Scott, as a journalist, interviewed R.E.M. back in the early days when they first played Seattle for that same free music monthly, and he's has a lot in common with Peter Buck, similar record collections, similar size of record collections, and when the Young Fresh Fellows went on tour, they stayed at Peter's house, blah 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 blah. Well, Seattle became Seattle in the early 90s. It became the place to be where all the cool bands were, and everybody wanted to have an association with Seattle. It was the most inspiring place for everyone, blah, blah, blah. It was the swinging London of its time. R.E.M. as well, they chose to make Automatic for the People in Seattle, quite a large amount of it. And so they found themselves working there for like 2 months or whatever. Well, I mean, who's Peter Buck going to call when he's in town? He's going to call Scott McCoy, like the cool journalist guy with a giant record collection, so I can nerd out on records all day. So they, having been sort of friends, now they were best buddies. Scott, by this time, as if he wasn't doing enough cool things, was also booking a venue in Seattle called the Crocodile Cafe, the place where I went every single night, where my band was the first band to play on that stage, etc. And Peter started hanging out with us there, and the owner, Stephanie, and Peter met, and they got married. And so Peter never left. So all of that became our little clubhouse, that venue and hanging out. And the -5 was the musical embodiment of that hanging out, and Peter just joined in the fun. Peter is someone like me who wants to be in a different project, in many different projects as possible, and do as many things as possible. And so we were playing music together all the time. As part of the -5, and that I mean, I have certain versatilities in music that I think would be interesting to someone like Peter, and so what I now understand is that they have an anti-poaching rule, so they had considered asking me to join the band in 1995 for their Monster Tour, the really big giant tour. But I was still actively in the Posies, and they had a rule that they wouldn't do that to someone. They wouldn't do that to a band, like taking, how could you say no to being in the biggest tour of the year? And they knew that, and so they were like, they thought about it, but decided not. And I found that out later. But when the Posies, split up because my bandmate quit, now we're back together, but it seemed like it was over at the time. Well, then I was a free agent, and at that point, Peter gave me a call, basically. Well, didn't even give me a call. Barrett Martin gave me a call. Barrett Martin, drummer for the Screaming Trees, etc., had played on the album that R.E.M. made after Bill Berry, their original drummer, left. and he wanted to play drums in the band. They had 2 drummers on the record. They went with Joey Waronker, Beck's drummer, for whatever they were going to do. They weren't sure yet, and they said, "Hey, Barrett, why don't you play keyboards?" And he's like, "I'm a drummer. I can play bass." I mean, he's a multi-instrumentalist, but he's kind of like, I'm not a key. I mean, call Ken Stringfellow. He plays keys. I'm sure he'll do a great job. So then they were like, "Oh, we already thought it. Okay." So all I know is that I was hanging out at the Crocodile Cafe, like I did every night, and Peter was like, "Oh, hey, if you ever, just want to, come over and jam, like, yeah, you should just come over and jam." I was like, "Okay, sounds cool." And then like, "Hey, your solo record's really good. Really like it. Sounds great. Oh yeah, it's a cool record. Been listening to it a lot in the car." I'm like, "Okay, cool, thanks. Yeah." And then it's like, yeah. So anyway, we got this record, and we're probably not going to go on tour, but we're going to do some promos tours. So maybe if you want to audition or whatever, that'd be great. Okay, cool. And I'm like, wait, what? Who? What? Are you talking about R.E.M.? I was like, he just asked me to like go audition for R.E.M. Like, what the? Because he just delivered as if like, hey, I was thinking about maybe going and having a muffin. I mean, there's like same level of gravitas. I was like, okay, muffins are good. What? So then I was like, okay. So I didn't really know how to follow up on that. And then the next night, he's like, oh yeah, hey, we're gonna do these auditions in San Francisco. So you probably should learn like, a bunch of songs. Like, actually, I made this list. There's like 50 songs on it. Like, that'd be cool. I'm like, okay, learn them on what? He's like, I don't really know. Like, maybe you might be playing bass or guitar or keys. I'm not really sure. I'm like, okay. So, like, I spent the weekend learning 50 songs on bass, guitar, and keys. I'm like, okay, got those. And then I was ready for my audition, whenever it is. And then the next night, he's like, oh, yeah, forget about the audition. Just go to San Francisco on this date, and then just, we'll start playing. I'm like, okay, so I'm playing with you? Like, whoa. What? Like, okay. Yeah, right. Sounds good. So I went to San Francisco and joined R.E.M. That's pretty much like, as if, I mean, I have multiple absurdities in my life, but that is what we have to unpack here is that R.E.M. are one of the principal cornerstone bands of my youth. I mean, the Smiths, R.E.M., Husker Du, would be like a holy trinity of bands that I loved, once I understood where music was going and got out of like, the classic rock of my childhood. These are the bands that got me out of classic rock, that showed me there was much more going on, and the modern world was a beautiful thing. So R.E.M. is the only band I ever wrote a fan letter to, for example, when I was 14 or whatever the hell it was, Yeah. So that was just crazy. I played it really cool, but it's bonkers. It's still bonkers.
Yeah. Wow. So when you showed up in San Francisco, did you went to a venue or to play a show? That's how it, or was it a rehearsal hall? You sort of just said like, come to San Francisco and come to this where like what
so
happened?
Basically, I mean, it's even crazier than this, but than that. But we did go rehearse at a rehearsal studio in San Francisco. Yeah. And what they had, well, first of all, the first show was like an acoustic show, so they had all these acoustic instruments and like vibes and stuff like that. I mean, I didn't. There was nothing in my memo about playing the vibes, but I will. But it just like, okay, we got a set of vibes. All right, and we're doing all this acoustic stuff, and I'm like, okay, so I know there's going to be some rock shows involved at some point, but okay, I'll do this. I mean, boom, 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 and play the piano, and okay. So I kind of got the hang of it, and of course, like there were like, of the 50 songs they asked me to learn, I think we played like 5 of them. And so I was like, all these different songs, new songs that I didn't know, and I was like, that's cool, learn them. Right. And luckily, I'm a really good follower. That's one of that might be my main talent. I'm not the flashiest player, but I'm a really good follower. So day 2 at the rehearsal place, I'm like, okay, I think I finally got it down. There's just a couple questions because some of these songs I really don't even, they never give me a chord sheet or even a recording. I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm just playing along with whatever they're doing. Sounds good, but
Right.
maybe I should ask some questions. Like, is this like a F sharp minor, or is this like just an A chord that's lost its way? Like, what's going on here? So I was.
Were they not songs that were on the on any album?
Well,
or
like
something?
the
You
album Up wasn't out yet, so the album we were
so
touring
the
for,
material wasn't even available,
and I
right.
just didn't have it, and I couldn't. It's not like I could go on Spotify and check it out or whatever. I mean, it's like this didn't
Right, yeah,
exist yet.
yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. It didn't.
So
you were
day 2 of this rehearsal thing. I arrived with a series of questions to ask Peter about. Should I do this or that? Is everything cool? Blah, blah, blah. So I walk up to Peter and like, he's just not seeing me. I mean, he's looking at me, but he's like looking through me and he's like strangely agitated. And I'm like, okay. Cause I was like, hey, about I'm just like Mr. Enthusiasm here. I'm like, hey, about that one song. I really am curious about this one guitar chord. I can kind of hear it, but do you want me to? And he's like, yeah. And like, kind of like, and I'm like, okay, a death in the family, like what happened? And I said, so yeah, but I mean, should I play on that? And he's like, hey, yeah, it's cool. What do we got to do? Listen, so Neil's gonna be here in a couple minutes, so I just, maybe we should just maybe get ready for that. And it didn't register me on at all. I was like, maybe we have a photo shoot, or I don't know. And I'm like thinking like, Neil, like what Neil could? And then as I'm thinking like lists of famous Neils, like. And walks Neil Young and his dad. And I'm like,
wow.
Oh, okay, so this is what we're doing today? And so I'm like, looking for a place to just go, so I see, and then I realized that from yesterday to today, they've installed the pump organ that I was like, because I'd kind of know, I said, that looks like the organ that Neil Young played when he played the Paramount a couple years ago. Funny.
Yeah.
And then I realized that's the organ that Neil Young played at the Paramount a couple years ago. And so I kind of like went over to play it. And so no fanfare. People pick up instruments. This was not on my radar at all. Nobody told me this was happening. And then... So Peter's like, well, yeah, I think, it'd be great to do some stuff from, on the beach because you never play that stuff. So, we learned Ambulance Blues. I'm like, no, we didn't. But okay, I know the song, luckily.
Right.
On the beach. Okay, yeah, okay, sure, I know it, yeah. And so I'm playing it, and Peter is freaking nervous, which is just odd. He's quite famous musician, blah, blah, blah. He's played with a lot of people. It wasn't day one for him. But Neil Young made him nervous. I mean, I understand. Neil Young is rather iconic. So Peter is kind of worried that things aren't going to go well. So at one point we're playing, and after we stop, he's like, oh, yeah, Ken, I don't really, maybe the organ is not really the best thing there or whatever. And I'm like, oh, okay. And Neil goes, no, it's cool. I was listening. Yeah, that's cool. It's important. Keep doing it. Sounds good. Keep going. And I'm like, well, I just got Neil Young's blessing, so my life is complete.
Yeah, right.
It's something. And then we played the show the next day, which is the Bridge School show at big outdoor amphitheater in San Francisco. Blah blah blah.
Yeah. It's Shoreline, right?
And so we backed up Neil Young for songs, and then. In our set, he came and joined us for a song called Country Feedback, which has room for a very, very long solo, both to start the song and then it's just one chord progression over and over again, and to end the song. And so, the solos bookend the song, and then the chord progression never changes in the middle. It's just this hypnotic flowing thing that just keeps going around and around, and it reaches a peak, and then it, Michael sings his bit and reaches the dramatic high point, and then guitar solo takes over, in this case Neil Young. So I was playing bass on that tune, and the thing that happened is I started playing and sort of realized, like, I think Neil, like, hears some of the things I'm playing, because who knows what, it's like a festival situation. Maybe the sound on stage, you can't hear every instrument perfectly, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So I realized that when I'm playing holes, he's kind of like moving in to fill them. Like, I realized he's actually listening to my bass line right now. This is kind of
cool.
Really cool and incredibly disconcerting because now there's no mistakes. So he starts doing his Neil Young thing, and he starts shuffling over, and then he's like, I'm like, oh, I better get out of his way, because I guess he's going to go rock out for the bridge school kids who are like on a riser behind the stage. And then, and I'm like, no, he like basically, he like comes right into me, and he's like, blazing away. It's acoustic guitar, but he's still playing an amazing solo and just like getting into it and rocking out with me.
Yeah.
This is my third day on the job. I'm like, fucking A. I turned any kind of gradient of purple that you can imagine. I guarantee you, I turned it that day, because I was ready to explode. It was so intense, and so not from my normal world.
Wow. That's amazing. Was this the highlight of your... So 3 days into the job, that was the highlight of your experience with R.E.M., was playing with them at Neil at the Bridge School benefit?
I mean, that's kind of like a musical life highlight. I mean, like, that's, I mean, we had a lot of great experiences. I mean, and I mean, no doubt. But I mean, jamming with Neil Young, which and that wasn't the last time it happened. We did it a couple more times, but over the years. But that's kind of in a category of itself.
That's an amazing start to that. So, I mean, you played live with them, and you toured with them for quite a while, right? For like 6 or 7 years,
even more. Yeah, I mean, I mean, yeah, for sure, like a hard 7. And then on the 2008 tour, they had my band open some of the shows, and they said, "Well, why don't you just sit in for songs, when you're with us," kind of thing. So.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. What was that like I know that wasn't your first experience, because you had also played with Big Star as well, and other bands, but was kind of R.E.M. your kind of the pinnacle of your live band experience, so to speak?
Well, in terms of
how
scale,
can you place it?
Yeah. I mean, we got R.E.M. got to do things that nobody else I've played with will ever get to do. I mean, we headlined Glastonbury twice. We headlined Rock in Rio to 250,000 people. We did our own show in Hyde Park to 85,000 people, bigger than my hometown. We did Live 8, where we were on a bill with Pink Floyd that included Roger Waters, The Who, Madonna, U2, Paul McCartney, blah, 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 that was viewed perhaps by 1 billion people.
Holy shit.
This kind of thing. It was incredible. I mean, the thing is that all of that magnificence, and all of that incredible, I mean, it worked for me because it was R.E.M. and is a band I already loved. I mean, if I'd gotten that opportunity with Dave Matthews Band, I mean, for example, who are not a band, not to say anything bad about them, but they're not a band I grew up with loving, and I didn't have that music in my person already, as a part of my DNA. It would have been, might not have been as satisfying in a sense. It would have been interesting, but the R.E.M. made it comfortable. I was like, their music already felt rather like home. So it worked. All of that worked because of that. And it was the live band that we had for that period. Even though we changed drummers a little bit way through, but other than that, it was the 3 guys in R.E.M. and Scott McCoy, who I already knew and loved, and myself, and then either Joey Warnker or the late Bill Rieflin on drums. It's just very comfortable, and it was just a great band. It was a kind of a no BS kind of situation too. I mean, there were it's not like we had like backing vocals on tape or something like this. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that it was a very real, cool musical situation.
Yeah, it was happening each night in a particular way that just had to kind of do with where you guys were at in that one particular night. It was organic,
very organic. And then you just have to add the fact that R.E.M. had their own brand of unlikely success. I mean, considering how they started. And they were kind of everybody's favorite secret band in a sense when Murmur came out. I mean, it was already a popular record, but I don't think anybody saw 70 million albums coming down the chain from Murmur.
No.
No. Even, I mean, it's just didn't seem that it just didn't seem like the outcome that was going to happen. But it did. And so it gave them a global voice, that just kind of made everything very interesting. I mean, I would if they were playing, you know, the Moore Theater in Seattle to 1,000 people, or stuff like that, would have said yes also. You know, I mean, they're one of my favorite bands. So, but as it happens, you know, they had this ability to kind of, do things at a certain scale. And of course, it was a very easy tour to do. It was very comfortable, and we had traveled in very easy conditions. So this way, we could go on tour for 9 months in a year, and it was low impact.
Wow. What's that like to play in Brazil in front of that many people?
Blurry. I mean, that's a lot of people. I mean,
yeah,
it's just, have you seen that?
At some level
that
of
meme
scale,
that says like, you miss live concerts? Well, okay, but this is actually a rug under a coffee table. Have you seen that meme?
Of course.
So how the little fuzzy filaments of shag carpet look in that?
Right.
That was like, imagine that, but like horizon to horizon to horizon, like left, right, and back.
Wow.
Just carpet fuzz. I mean, people were into it, but it's just like, it's so huge that I can't really get my mind around it. It was like looking left or right, much wider than anybody could see. But I mean, they had screens and stuff, but you just like, my God, it's going all the way down there and all the way down there. I can't see the end of it. Really crazy.
That's insane. How does that impact you as a player?
What was that?
How does that impact you as a player? That the scale of, is there a particular point at which it's kind of just law of diminishing returns, and it's like, okay, it was 200,000 or whatever people. It could have been at 10,000.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that the fundamental has to be, because you can't really see them all. You kind of, it becomes more of an impression that there's that many people there. Like after like an outdoor gig of after like 50,000, I mean, like that's just so big. It's hard to really imagine. So all you can really do is kind of bear down. I'm not there to make the big gestures, and like, I'm not on the Diamond Vision going, hey everybody, I'm just, playing keys and doing my thing. So, my job is to just stay consistent and hold it down and not freak out, basically, and just like, okay, this is cool. The energy you feel, more than you can see, because you can't really see any individual faces, but you do feel like all this energy from that many people. But again, you have to stay grounded and just play, just like, do the hold it down. That's my job.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. We didn't even talk about, when we're talking about what you're doing recently, is this recent single, Sideways. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that came about?
Well, I mean, before all the shenanigans of 2020 happened, back in 2019, in those heady, innocent salad days, my band and I recorded basically a whole record. I mean, we had planned, we had it all planned out for the summer of 2019. We were, the plan was, and what we did was we got together at my studio in Seattle. I still have a really, really nice studio there, where all my gear that would never make it over here, because it's too numerous and too heavy and too fragile to make it here, lives, and it's where I can work. It's a wonderful place. So I have that situation. And so it was kind of no question that my band would record in my studio. Just where else would we go? It's perfect facility. So we did that. We did basically, like, we worked during the week, and then on the weekends we would go somewhere and play. We played in Austin, Houston, Denton. We played in DC. We played in Chicago, Minneapolis, Milwaukee. And this kind of thing. So the idea is that since we don't live in the same place really, it's hard for us to rehearse. So, and also when you're now in the modern thing for us, like traditionally we come to the end of the touring cycle, we write some songs, we record, and then we go in the touring cycle, and then we discover all these things about playing those songs that we wish we would have known when we were recording them. So we decided to hedge that a little bit and do some shows in the middle of the recording to, play the songs that we're just freshly working on and road test them a little bit, along with other stuff, of course. But we played a lot of new songs each night, and people love that because they're seeing them, for the first time and all this thing. And so we recorded the album, and then I did a bunch of solo touring at the end of 2019, and then at the beginning of 2020, we got together in LA at our drummer Frankie's studio, and Frankie Siragusa, and we did a bunch of overdubs and kind of finished the recording. And the idea was, okay, well, now it's time to mix, and then maybe in the fall we'll get it out and we'll go on tour. Well, God laughs at your plan.
The rest is history. Yeah.
Once things like that happened, the whole urgency of mixing the record like right away kind of got away from us, and everyone was just trying to recalibrate their lives and figure out where they're going and where they're going to spend, this not quite solitary confinement for the next few months. So the short of the matter is that we're still mixing, but actually most of that is actually done. We didn't really push it because we don't really know when we can tour. So I'm gonna put it out there and say that we'll put out this record next year no matter what. Maybe even this year. It's so close to being done that we can start saying things like that. We have a show.
Yeah.
And we have an invitation to play at a festival in Spain. We're booked to play at a festival in Spain in September.
That's the what's the name of that one?
It's called Visorfest. Spain has many ones. You're probably thinking of like Benicàssim is more in the summer.
Oh, there was one other I forgot.
There's Primavera Sound in May, which is
Primavera Sound. Yeah, that's it.
That's a really good one. But so Visorfest, it's a good lineup. It's like us, Mudhoney Teenage Fan Club, the Waterboys. There's a couple other ones and some Spanish bands. So nice little, medium-sized festival. Will it happen? Nobody knows. It's announced. It's on sale. Right now, Americans can't travel to Europe. Europe is closed, but that could all lift and we could all be fine and it could happen.
Yeah, there's a couple festivals that have announced for like June here. I don't really know what's happening. I have my doubts. Red Rocks put out their entire summer schedule, but I think that's kind of... Yeah, who knows? I have my doubts about that one in particular. Yeah, you might as well. Red Rocks, bands will just play Red Rock.
That was a vaccination pun, by the way. Just thought I'd let you in on that.
Pardon me?
That was a vaccination pun, by the way.
Oh, which I missed that entirely.
Because when you're talking about all the announcements, I said, well, it's worth a shot.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Oh,
snuck that one in there.
That was so subtle. that I missed it.
That was like the 5-finger death tap of puns. There, just like.
That's right. Yeah, like the ninja punster. Ken, you said before. So I had a couple questions.
Yeah.
One was about the album. So you've got. You have a bunch of songs, and you're just kind of you're mixing them. So it's sort of like
it was a little bit of an outlier. Sorry, we were talking about Sideways, and then I got sidetracked.
Yes.
So Sideways was one song
that's not going to count.
Yeah, that was just kind of
no.
Yeah. So we had that song that we didn't feel like it was really fitting in the totality of the album. It was a little more retro in a sense to our older sound, but we thought that might be a nice thing to put out there during this time to kind of remind people what they like about us before we disappoint them with our upcoming record.
Well, I like the song a lot. It's great. What is the cover? Like, I can't tell from the
the cover artwork
Spotify.
Is cool. Yeah. So basically, I think that Cityscape is in Canada, but you see, it's like fingers like pushing open some
sideways.
Blinds, but the whole thing is 90 degrees.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. It's super cool. And you mentioned something. When you were talking just now, you said how you like to road test songs. So.
Well, we do now. We didn't. We kind of didn't do that so much before, but now we do. It's like back in the old days when we first started playing. Of course, we spent. We're kind of weird because we made a record before we ever played a show. But the next record, we had all this time to write it and play local shows because we never had been on tour, and so the songs get worked up in clubs and you play them night after night, and then that kind of stops happening when you're out there flogging the album you just released. You're out there playing that stuff. And R.E.M. was quite cool about for many years about writing their stuff on the road and putting that into their set That was, a big part of, they made that whole album during the Monster Tour. They made the New Adventures in Hi-Fi at Soundcheck every day. That's quite, but
right.
That's very ambitious, and it's hard to muster the energy sometimes to do that. So for us, we just had kind of gotten into, like, we play the album that we just made, and that right there is already a bunch of new stuff for people to digest. So,
right.
But this time, we wanted to get some of that workshopping in on the songs, because playing them live is not the same as playing them in rehearsal. It's just completely different.
Right. Well, is playing them, is that part of your creative process for new material?
It was this time.
Or are you wanting to just get out there and see how songs that you've done in the studio will play in a live setting?
No, we wanted to be able to adapt with the feedback that we would get and the things we would discover while we were playing those songs live. Even if we'd done some tracking on them, it's easy enough to either A, do it again, or B, put this new information that we just learned about playing them. Like playing live, you sing louder, you like do more kind of brutal stuff with the instruments, and if you're just working up a song in rehearsal, you wouldn't necessarily start taking those kind of risks. In a sense, you might just be learning the song and I want to get competent at it. Whereas with live, you want to destroy it. You want to like do a lot of make it have serious impact. So that's good to put back in the recording.
Right. And I'm really interested in what influence playing with Big Star had on you, and in particular playing with Alex Chilton.
Yeah.
And how has that kind of trickled down through the ages for you, if at all?
Well, I mean, Alex, of course, was a very interesting cat, and I will say that he was a very unfussy musician, despite the fact he was very, he was very diligent in terms of his own personal betterment, shall we say. He'd really studied hard on like his jazz chord comping and stuff like that, and he just kept trying to improve that. But in terms of like applying that to like a studio situation or a live situation, he didn't like things to be too precious. I mean, he wasn't quite in the same state of mind as he was in some of his solo records, where like you're not even really supposed to play like actual notes or whatever. He was a little more together than that, shall we say, a little more conventional or whatever you want to call it. But he just, both R.E.M. and Alex actually had that in common, in that in the studio, these people who are considered really, crafts people and whatnot, were very unfussy about the studio and very unintimidated by the expensive studio environment. And that's not just a matter of finance. I mean, it's a matter of just not letting the studio be too sacred, shall we say. And just, I mean, not trying to fix everything, I mean, I'm sort of meticulous when I'm making records for people, and I, try and get their, things to be tight and all this stuff. And if they're not playing tight, sometimes they want to be tight, and so I have to find ways to make someone who's not tight, blah, blah, blah. Where there's the other school of thought is to just don't even try, just let the thing be what it is, which I also do sometimes. But for my own music, it was hard to let go of meticulousness, because John and I are just that way. We have that it's at several different levels in our creative process of just details. It's all about details. And we made our first album ourselves, so we could control all these tiny little details. And our second album we made with a meticulous English producer, and so on and so forth. So just working with people like Alex and R.E.M. who just weren't that fussy was like, well, wait, you don't even have to know the song when you go to the studio. You can just go and jam on something and make something up. And if you're a good musician, you will turn it into something cool. I know that seems kind of obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me until really working with those people. Because I thought you had to rehearse and demo and do all this stuff to get to that stage so that you nail it in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, from a non-music. I mean, I love music. I listen to music. I I play a little guitar. I don't really consider myself a musician, but yeah, I mean, but I can analyze it. I mean, there's a dichotomy there, right? That you wanted to be really meticulous, but then was Alex completely on the other end of the spectrum? And at what point did did his influence kind of come into where the Posies were?
Well, I think when we made an album with him, it's 2004. I mean, I was already pretty established, but I still had, kind of a methodical way of working in the studio, and preparation and all this kind of stuff was very important to me, and blah, blah, blah. And also just, the idea that you could put something out there and it wasn't quite right, and people would somehow know and go, ooh, yeah, you're supposed to be playing an F sharp over that chord, and you played a C sharp. Loser. Like, people don't listen to music that way.
Right.
They just, whatever, you can play completely wrong. There's sugar pie, honey pie, I don't know. That song, James Jamerson is playing half of that song in the wrong key. He's not even in the right key. For the bass line of that song, if you solo it up, he's like a half step off in certain parts, but the bass is just like boom, 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 boom. It's so bouncy that it doesn't matter. So I'd play like a bass line with Alex and go, oh, okay, so I messed that up. It's not with the kick drum right there. Ooh, blah blah blah. I'll lose points in the whatever. I won't win the music meticulousness prize, which doesn't exist. And Alex, so I want to fix that one thing, and he would say, like, why? That's a very Alex way of dealing with things. It's sort of confrontational, but it's actually has a point. And I'd be like, well, because it's not quite. He's like, so, and it seemed a little dickish at first, but then like a day would go by, and I would listen to things. I was like, I don't even remember what notes I was supposed to be fixing. It sounds fine. So he was right. He just cut to the chase. He didn't sugarcoat his message. That
can
Alex.
translate. Yeah, and that can translate to so many different things. Mm-hmm. It's like, try not to drill down so much on what the fuck you're doing every day, and if you look back at it, it's almost like being in the moment, right?
Well, yeah, and just trusting yourself. I think that was the main lesson too. Is like, you're fixing all those things is kind of like me second guessing that I'm A, not good enough, and that B, people are going to find out, and that is irrelevant information. I mean, good enough doesn't really have any. There's no way to judge that. I mean, there are all kinds of levels of musicians of varying skill, technical skill, who have made an impact on your life and mine. And some of them, I love some musicians who are really flashy and showy and technically great. Some of those kind of musicians bore me to tears. Some musicians who are barely able to play an instrument have brought tears to my eyes of joy. I mean, like, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't. There's no linear path that way. And so trusting yourself is really kind of. I mean, it's like the secret of life in a way. I'm just like saying, I'm okay. I'm okay. I deserve to be here as much as the next person. I mean, not in a way of like entitlement, more in a way of like, I'm not unworthy of participating.
Well, I just spoke with Kelly Scott of the band Failure from the 90s, and we had a long discussion about being in the moment. I mean, Kelly had struggled with addiction problems, and he had some recent health issues, so that was really in kind of front of the mind for him. But we talked a lot about how it translated over into music and being in the moment, and from a performance perspective as well. Does that kind of sound familiar to you? Or?
Totally. I mean, it's something that I had to sort of learn, in a sense. I mean, sort of have a little bit of that intuitively, but really a lot of things about my life changed around the time I was 30-ish, and just because my band split up, and I could finally look at other things other than just the, how are we going to make our band happen? And so I could spend a little time learning about the rest of the world, and the idea of kind of just letting things be what they are without trying to think chess moves ahead. Everybody's so into like thinking chess moves ahead. This is like a big skill you're supposed to develop. And actually, that's not, for me, I think, the most important skill. I think the most important skill is being able to adapt, because all the finest laid plans can poof into dust at any moment. And so,
Right.
like, not trying to decide what things are before they just show you what they are, I think, is my version of being in the moment. Just let life show you what it is, and then just walk through it, rather than trying to categorize and name and ooh, I'm going to organize this, and I'm going to plan ahead for that, and ooh, you can't second guess all of reality. It's just not possible. You can't like see around 1,000 corners or 1,000,000 corners or whatever possibilities.
Yeah,
out
it would
there.
drive you crazy. It would drive you crazy. And you're just saying, like, see what's going on and react to it. Has that changed over the years for you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think with the benefit of having things be okay with that kind of mindset, also has given me more and more confidence as time goes on. And plus, like I keep alluding to, I've had all these crazy fluky things happen to me. So in a like all those things were things I never would have been able to engineer if I'd tried. If I had like $1 million, I couldn't have made some of the things in my life happen. So it showed me that the best things in life, that maybe life actually gives you some opportunities, and it's better to just be like open and see an opportunity for what it is, as opposed to like, you're like, oh, I've got to get into the voice. That is the thing I must do. And meanwhile, there's this other opportunity sitting here like, hey, I'm an opportunity. You should just do this. No, the voice. I got to audition. I got to do, like, whatever. I'm just making that up as a possible scenario. But I'm saying you can't hyperfixate. All the best things in life that have happened to me have been surprises, I would say. I mean, or close to it. Spontaneous decisions, shall we say.
Yeah. Are you reflecting on the number of other projects that you have, or other musicians that you've worked with, which are legion as far as what your whole, musical experience has been thus far?
Well, a little bit of that. I think for me, like, because I've had these, all these great opportunities, I mean, like crazy stuff that is completely asymmetric compared to like my level of skill. I mean, I'm not saying that to be falsely modest. I'm saying there are many musicians who can outplay me on a daily basis. And yet I've had these great opportunities. What does it mean? I don't know. It maybe means that I, just pay attention to opportunities, and I don't have the,
You don't shy away.
I don't have the mindset of saying that that's impossible, or I'm not worthy. Luckily, even at times where I was insecure, when an opportunity came, I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. Just look at it for what it is, without going, oh yeah, but if I do that, then they're gonna blah blah blah. Or if I, like, that's not. I'm kind of just naive enough that those things kind of work out. As far as the, with the other now, being more conscious of things and having been through many, many kinds of experiences and created experiences and things like this, I kind of just like to keep the fires going. I kind of feel like it's a nice thing to be generous to the world that's been generous to you. I think that's kind of really what it comes down to. I charge for what I do, for like doing studio work and playing shows. I charge money for that quite on a regular basis. But to be honest, right. I'm quite available. You know what I mean? Like I put a lot of work into everything I do, and I give a lot of effort. I mean, as someone who was helping me in the studio recently said, like, it's interesting, like whoever I've seen you work with, you give them exactly the same thing, whether it's someone who's sold 500,000 records or someone who's making their first record. You treat them exactly the same, and I think that's kind of a cool take, and yeah, I think everybody deserves to be taken seriously, and be I think like being how do they say that, being seen, that's really it, like, and that can work also for people who are if I'm working with someone who's more well known, I mean, to look at them with the sheen of like well-known person is not really doing them any favors. Just look at them as like, here's a musician that I need to record. A microphone goes here. Like I need to tell them some feedback, see if they're, they can do their job better, help them. It's just the same. It's just like treating things as they are, as normal things.
Yeah, cutting to the core of what's important. Mm-hmm. What's important is like oftentimes about what kind of human being you are. Yeah.
Just what gets us through the day. I mean, how you can just make that day. I mean, I have a little opportunity in the studio to make someone's day a very positive experience. And, you know, of course, like, and it's not easy because the people in the studio are often really nervous because nothing about going to a recording studio is that cheap. I mean, it is a premium kind of thing to do. My studio is not outrageously expensive by any stretch of the imagination, but still, if you're there for 5 days, you know, it's like, you know, some serious money. And so people get intimidated by that. And when people get afraid, they sometimes get, you know, fear is the tinder that sparks anger quite a bit, right? So people get tense. So, you know, you have to make it so that nothing is a big deal. The studio's chill, everything's relaxed, and it's a good thing. And that just, you know, I have all these opportunities to make someone's day turn out really cool and even magical. Like if we get to the point where the work is really flowing, I mean, I forget because I just do that every day. But when I play all this stuff on their record and they go, wow, how did you do all that? And my answer would be because I do this every day. But for them, it's like a magic trick. You know, layers and layers of harmonies and all these guitar parts and stuff that takes them a lot longer to do because they're just either they have to think more about each thing because they're worried about it and they don't really have the benefit of so many previously successful outcomes, shall we say. So yeah, it's like sometimes in the studio it's like a magic trick, and that makes someone's day. They go, wow, some magic happened in on my record.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you really have benefited from what we initially started talking about in this kind of segment about the influence that Alex had on the way that you think about things, that you don't, maybe at one point you tended to be more meticulous and overthinking, but trying to get out of that because of the exposure you had to different ways of thinking allowed you to move in this direction professionally and be very successful at it. Would that be a fair analysis?
That would be one angle to look at it from. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think just, I don't know. I think that there's another thing in there which has to do with inclusion. I think that is another primal component. You know, I went through some experiences as a young person, both with being like a total social outcast many times over because my family was always moving, this kind of thing. I went through like really, really intense and seriously traumatic bullying at one point in my life that was incredibly violent. And all that kind of stuff has sort of forged in my mind a layer of like, hey, I don't want to see anyone excluded. I don't like seeing people excluded. And a lot of the things about the competition of a career, which is true in any career, when it manifests itself in music, you know, like people try and make themselves look cooler than they are, bigger than they are, more popular than they are. And some people feel that like exclusion is kind of a way to make them look more interesting. Right. And that to me, hey, however you want to live your life, that's your deal. But for me, that's just antithetical to my way of thinking. I'm really about inclusion. And that is kind of what the Posies brand, in a sense, if it were such a thing, was built on. Because I think my bandmate kind of had some similar experiences in life, and we kind of, without realizing it, our message was kind of that way. And so, for example, in our early career, we had this cool thing with the radio and the press and whatnot, but what cemented it is that we were a really safe and welcoming place to go be at one of our shows. You know, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't violent, it wasn't like dangerous, it wasn't sexist, it wasn't all these things that would make somebody feel weird to be there. And we became kind of, without realizing it, a safe space, really, in a way. And that kind of bonded us with a whole generation of people in Seattle, for example.
Yeah, and very kind of relevant today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but it seemed natural at the time, but now those kind of ideas are hitting people that had never paused to think about those kind of ideas. And to be fair, I didn't even really think about those kind of ideas. I just had experiences that forced me to kind of be in a certain way because I didn't want to be like what I'd experienced, and I certainly didn't want anyone else to experience those kind of things on my hands. That would be terrible.
Yeah. So having been excluded and having been a victim of bullying has made you more inclusionary.
For sure. I think it's made me just a much better person in every way, strangely enough. I mean, I wouldn't want to say that bullying is this wonderful crucible that'll make you a better person.
No,
that's what happened to me. I mean, I think it showed me some things that have kept me humble in a sense. Like for some of the things I've been through, I mean, I had a lot of success at a very young age. I could be a total little brat at that age if I wanted to be, but I kind of had that beaten out of me a little bit. Arrogance was not really possible for me after some of the humiliation that I'd been through already. So that kind of prepped me in a good way for the little taste of popularity and fame that I encountered.
Interesting. Well, that's very introspective and admirable.
It is what it is.
Yeah. No, well, it's, all our past experiences shape kind of who we are today. Wow. Well, it's very enlightening to hear all your perspectives. What's what's kind of your thinking going forward for the near term here, like getting out of COVID and
I don't know. I hope that's near term. Let's touch wood on that.
Yeah, but I mean, near to medium term.
Yeah. Well, I want to finish the album. I think that's job number one, is getting the Posies album finished. We have a couple 3 mixes that we need to nail down, and then starting to, figure out if we can get together at some point and do some of the creative work that we have to do, or if we can do that work remotely. Like we made a video for that song Sideways that we were talking about earlier, that we were never in the same country. So the video turned out really cool. So I think we can keep doing stuff like that if we have to. And that's kind of the big thing. I mean, I do studio work. I'm always, people are always welcome to look me up. Probably Instagram at Ken Stringfellow is probably the best way these days. Yeah. Or my website, kenstringfellow.com. I've got some online shows. I haven't, one that I've announced so far.
We talked about
26th.
Feb 26th, and you can, people can get in touch with you and have you write a song for them.
Yes. So the bio and my Instagram will lead you to all the kind of things like that, like shows and whatnot.
Right on. That's totally cool, man.
We're trying.
Yeah, that's all you can do right now. Well, thanks so much, Ken, for being here.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate your time, for taking the time to hang and talk about all these kind of things. You're a fascinating human, man. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it myself.
Yeah, cool. All right. Take care and au revoir.
Yeah, à bientôt.
Yes, hopefully. All right. We'll see you soon, man. Bye. Okay, there we are. The amazing Ken Stringfellow, music philosopher, storyteller, generous human, and expert punster. I mean, we only hit about 5 of those, but there were more in the intro when we were just talking earlier before we got started, so I knew it was going to be interesting. I think we kind of self-limited on that, but I loved his stories. He is a renowned touring musician, and I was just enthralled with his stories and his words and storytelling that I loved so much, and it was good to hear get a COVID update on the situation in Europe, where it seems like they're starting to play some shows and some windows are opening up, especially for someone who's a solo artist like Ken, but which makes it easier for him just to pick up and move around when he can, and certainly took advantage of that by playing in Spain, which is interesting. And Ken just keeps working super hard, even during this COVID period. But I thought it was interesting when he said that, look, COVID's making him work a little less hard. It took him back to 5 days from his normal 7 work day per week. So you get a sense of how hardworking this guy is. And of course, looking at all the bands that he's played with and all the collaborations that he's experienced, and in being a touring member of R.E.M. and Big Star and everything else that he's done. He's just such a hardworking and individual, and he's also super adventurous. I mean, he was gonna play Beirut back when before the show shut down when he left L.A., if you remember, and he says that he's the first American to have played Bhutan. I mean, I didn't fact check that. I'm going to take him on his word. If he's not the first, he's one of the only for sure. And I believe him. And that was a great story. And so was the Laos story. But really, kind of my favorite thing was to hear him talk about the Neil Young Bridge School story, which dovetails with his introduction and interview and audition process with R.E.M., which was a long process in and of itself, as he explained, with Peter Buck, having met him, and then he's kind of, come on down and maybe play with us, and then he realizes it's an audition, and Neil shows up. That was just fucking amazing, especially when you consider that R.E.M. was his favorite band as a kid, along with the Smiths and Husker Du, and kind of took him out of the classic rock world and back into the new world of music at the time. So that was certainly a key event for Ken, and I appreciate him sharing that with us. And there's a new Posies album coming out that's forthcoming. They're just kind of putting some final mixes on it to hear him tell that. So that's awesome. And they have a one single that's out. It's called Sideways. So check that out. It's really great. And he's got a streaming show coming up on February 26th, and like he mentioned, that he will write a song for you if you sign up for that, which I think is a phenomenal idea and so interesting. I can't wait to see how that turns out. So thanks again for joining me for this very special episode of Roadcase. I want to thank Ken Stringfellow again for taking the time and being so gracious to be here to just sit down with me for a while and just spin his tales about his life and music, and I love him for that. So thanks again for tuning in to Roadcase. Thanks again so much for listening. And I'd like to encourage everyone to get involved with Roadcase. You can do so in a number of different ways. You can email me at info@roadcasepod.com with questions, comments, and even suggestions for guests. Or you can follow us on the socials, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We're at RoadcasePod. And we have a YouTube channel called Roadcase Podcast. And if you are able to and like to support Roadcase, we have a Patreon site at patreon.com/RoadcasePod. And of course, you can subscribe to this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And if you could please rate and review the podcast while you're there, that would be great. So I want to thank Walzer for this awesome theme music that we have. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening to Roadcase. We have a lot of great episodes coming up, so I'll see you on down the road.